The first episode of this DVD series by the Centre for Independently Owned Retail Research introduced Dr. John Byram, an expert retail geographer who co-authored the report High Street Britain 2015. Now we hear from House of Commons MPs Liberal Democrat Bob Russell and Conservative MP David Amess, who explain their views of the report's attitude to the dangers of chains.
Well, we're an all-party group. We're not part of government. We're volunteers, if you like. An all-party group is exactly that, as MPs from all parties. And the all-party small shops group, we were contacted by the Association of Convenience Stores, if I remember rightly, because their members tend to be smaller shops in neighbourhoods and in communities. And we held this inquiry into the High Street. We call it the High Street, although it's actually more in neighbourhoods where the problem is. Because of the sharp increase in the number of small local neighbourhood convenience stores that were shutting, and the huge growth of the supermarkets in the United Kingdom, which we felt was very damaging for communities, sustainable communities. And I think our inquiry confirmed that the trend, the growing trend, the rapidly growing trend towards the growth of the supermarkets, who now take in excess of 80%, if I remember rightly, of all the food sales in this country, is damaging for the consumer. The short-term convenience of a big supermarket selling everything, the cost to you to get there may not be public transport, so the cost of you driving there and heaping up your car with all manner of goods. There's growing evidence that a lot of food sold and purchased by consumers is not being consumed, it's being thrown away. 2 for the price of 1, all those sorts of things. So there are problems there. The grip that the supermarket chains have on producers, farmers and others in the food production chain, are such that they, while superficially they can squeeze down prices, it's to maximise their profits. And if you don't have competition across the board, eventually, and I think we begin to see signs of it now, is the consumer will start to lose out. Another thing is that big is not always better. Superficially, there is an attraction, and small can be beautiful. It can also be cheaper. Yes, it can be more expensive. It's a question of balance. But what is interesting is that whereas a supermarket in the main takes money out of a community and sends to head office, and very little of the money taken across the till actually stays in that community, in a small shop the bulk of the profit, the surplus, stays in that community because the shopkeeper lives there. The surplus, the profit he makes, he will then spend in other shops, and you repeat that process. The local economy benefits from local shops. The local economy loses from the big supermarkets who suck money out of a community, and that is very pronounced, of course, in deprived areas. Well, the conclusion was not surprising, was that the decline and death of neighbourhood community shops, the small baker, the small butcher, the small general stores, the small fruit stores. I think the long term is that there'll be a detriment. Ultimately there'll be less choice because you only have 1 or 2 supermarkets in a town. You won't have the selection of the small shops for the consumer. And if those major supermarkets are not local, and by definition they cannot be local, then the surplus, the profit, is sucked out of that community. Perhaps only 5% of the money turnover remains in that community. The rest goes elsewhere. Whereas in a locally owned business, the vast majority of that wealth is generated and regenerated, churned and rechurned in that community. That money is spent locally, local services, local purchases, and it continues to rechurn in that neighbourhood. And I believe that a government one day is going to wake up and realise that sustainable communities are not sustained by supermarkets. Well, the big concern here is that the convenience store sector is growing. That's good news. The bad news, it is growing because of the major supermarket chains have now gone into the convenience store sector. So in this town, for example, we have Tesco's with 2 major stores, and I think 5 or 6 neighbourhood stores, which are impacting on the small neighbourhood stores that have somehow survived the initial onslaught for the supermarkets, and they're now being undermined locally. And I think that government should be looking at this. This cannot be right, that the mega supermarket chains, and Sainsbury's is doing the same elsewhere, although not in Colchester, and the major supermarket chains are not only grabbing, if you like, the major business, they're also coming in now and scooping off the local trade as well. And that cannot be good. So the small independent family grocery store is suffering from a pincer movement. And again, the profit of those national convenience store chains is being taken out of those communities. So the concept of the convenience store growing, in one sense, is good, but no, it's not, because when you analyse it, you realise that it's actually the big boys and other guys that are doing it. The small shop sector, like small business generally, are well worth fighting for. They are an important part of the British fabric. But what we are seeing is the failure of central government to assist the small shop sector, small businesses in general. And I would like to see government take very seriously what our report said and what others have said, and to realise that if they are to have sustainable communities, the route to sustainable communities is not through major supermarkets. My view is that successive governments have allowed a free-for-all on the planning legislation, which has enabled too many out-of-town supermarkets, too many out-of-town shopping centres to be created, to the detriment of the town centre, to the detriment of neighbourhood community stores. And therefore successive governments must take full responsibility for allowing this to happen. Of course, out-of-town shopping centres have an appeal for white goods, furniture and things like that. I can understand the argument for that. What I don't understand is the argument for free-for-all in terms of food, clothing, chemists and so on like that. And I feel that one way of equalising it would be a levy on car parking spaces, which my recollection is that the Labour government, as they came in 1997, was going to do. But such is the power and influence of the supermarket chains on all political parties, including my own, that scheme was dropped. And I think there has to be a consensus among the political parties to agree a strategy rather than the supermarkets playing one off against the other. This should be an occasion where the political parties should strike a deal amongst themselves to come up with a consensus and to take on the supermarkets, because at the moment the supermarkets are deciding government policy.
In episode 3 of CIRR's Dangers of Chains DVD series, we hear from House of Commons MP David Amess.